Today is January 27th, 2022. I am Gabriele Fellows with the Museums of Lake County, and this is an oral history interview with Marty Klier. Marty, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
How do you spell your last name?
Klier.
And what can you tell us about your name? Were you named after anyone?
I was named after my father, who has a surprisingly similar name. I have a middle name, he doesn't, so I'm not a junior, which proved to be troublesome in a little town in the Northern California.
What is your date of birth and how old are you?
12/23/49 is my date of birth, and I'm 72.
Where were you born?
Right here in Lakeport. I was born at Lakeside Hospital on Lakeshore, and that's it.
What were your parents' names?
My dad, of course, was Marty Klier, and my mother's name was Edith Colleen Neal Klier.
Do you have any siblings?
I have two brothers, but I had three brothers. One has passed away.
What are your brothers' names?
My brother that passed away was Walter, and the other two brothers that live here in Lakeport are John and Richard.
Where did your ancestors come from?
My grandparents on my father's side immigrated in 1912 to the United States from Germany. My grandmother was German and my grandfather was Austrian. And my grandfather was a violin maker, which I always think is kind of romantic, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandfather was very far, you know, he just kind of saw things like they were. And he said, there's going to be a war and it's going to be in Europe and we're getting out. And he packed his family on a tramp steamer and sailed to Galveston, Texas, where he caught a train for Oakland, California.
Oh. How old was he when he did that?
I really don't know. My dad was, let's see, five. So he was, he barely remembers. In fact, my grandfather forbade them to speak German after they came to America.
Oh, wow.
He says, you're Americans now.
Uh-huh. Did he ever slip up and say anything in German?
He always, him and Grandma always spoke German when they argued. But the kids could understand it. My dad could understand German, but he couldn't speak it.
Oh.
And so it was rather humorous.
Who would you say raised you and why?
Well, my parents raised me in Scotts Valley. Actually, when I was born here, but my parents at the time were living in Turlock, California. And they both moved from here to Turlock. They bought a ranch in Turlock. But they found that the people just weren't as friendly and outgoing as they are in Lake County. So pretty much by the time I was born, they had decided they were going to get rid of the ranch down there and move back to Lake County, which they did.
How old were you when they did that?
Probably about, let's see, I can figure it out here. Probably about 3 or 4, maybe.
So you lived in Scotts Valley up until 3, and then you moved to Lake County?
Yeah.
Where in Lake County did you live?
What? Oh, we lived in Scott Valley.
Oh, that is in Lake County.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And my dad bought a ranch there, and we lived there. In fact, we me and my brother just sold the property there a little over 3 years ago. So they lived there for a long time. They bought it in 1952.
What was it like growing up there?
Nothing. We didn't know we were poor farmers. We had so much fun. We had acres to run on. We had, all kinds of wildlife to see and all kinds of, places to go, and other kids in the neighborhood that we could play with. It was great. It really was. It almost seems, idyllic by today's standards. We didn't have a lot of, going to school was a big thing. We're like, there's a lot of kids here. Yeah, it was very, very nice.
Do you have any memories of going to school? And what school did you go to?
Oh, I went to several. My mother was converted to being a Seventh-day Adventist. And so for part of my schooling, I went to their private school, which is between here and Upper Lake. And as years went on and Mom and Dad would get into scraps, we transferred a time or two to the public school here in town. And then finally, when high school rolled around, we went to high school here. It was pretty different too,
How was it different?
Oh, just the stuff that we could have. They had a big kind of a foot-powered merry-go-round and jungle gyms and things you could play on. You don't have them anymore, And the teachers were not afraid to give you a whack if you needed one.
Oh, did that ever happen to you?
Yeah. I was not very much as a young kid, but by the time I got about 6th grade, I got a whack in 6th grade, and I got a pseudo whack in 6th grade.
What did you do?
There was a bully who liked to bully people on the playground, and I wasn't very aggressive. And so he used to make me carry him, because I was a pretty big boy, and he was a really big boy. He used to make me carry him to the cafeteria. And finally one day I said, you know what, I'm not going to carry him to that cafeteria again. And then I thought about it, and I said, yeah, he's probably going to just beat the mud out of me. How can I keep that from happening? Mm-hmm. I invented pepper spray. Went in my mom's cupboard and got some cayenne pepper and put it in a little bottle and put it in my pocket. And when it came time for lunch, I dumped it in my hand and I just went out like I was going to lunch. And he told me he wanted me to go. I said, no, I'm not going to do it. He says, I'm going to beat you up. No, you're not. Yeah, I'm going to beat you up. No, you're not. It worked.
Cool.
But they didn't like it very well in the principal's office. So
yeah,
the kid was notorious. So I went to the principal's office and he gave me a very stern talking to. He says, you know, I'm going to have to hit you with that paddle. I said, yeah, I know. It's okay. He says, this is how this is going to work. He says, I'm going to hit the seat of that leather chair with this paddle so everybody hears it, and you're going to come out of my office crying. that's how it's going to work.
Oh, so
And he did.
he didn't really hate you.
He didn't hit me.
Oh, okay.
he knew what was going on by the time everything got on. And I never got asked to carry anybody to the cafeteria again. So it was very good.
Did you have a group of friends growing up that you hung out with?
Not a lot, maybe a couple of them. And as it worked out, we, pretty much went through grade school and high school together. And we're still friends in a lot of cases, the ones that are still around here and some of the ones that aren't around here,
What did you guys have in common?
Really not much, other than that we lived here, Things were, it was such a close-knit community then that we did things together and we had to make our own entertainment. There was nothing in the way of entertainment. The theater here used to get a movie in and it would be here for a month. So after you've seen it 2 or 3 times, it's lost its effect.
So there wasn't a lot to do?
No, there's nothing to do. But there was nothing to do in the way of organized entertainment. We did all kinds of things, We made stuff. We just, went places. Parents weren't as afraid as they are now of their kids getting out. We used to, and like I was just talking to Clark, I was allowed to carry that a little .22 rifle by the time I was probably about 8 by myself. And nobody thought anything of it. There used to be a Safeway store here in town. It was right where the Bank of America building is now, and it had a dirt parking lot. And almost everybody shopped there. My mom would go there shopping, and if we had scrounged up some money, we had a few nickels and dimes. We would go across the street. There was a place there, it was called Lamps and Pontiac, that had a little bit of everything. It had gas pumps, they sold cars, and they sold sporting goods. And they were nice enough, they knew that all us kids didn't have the 40 cents for a box of .22 ammunition. So they would open a box and dump it in a brandy snifter that they kept on the counter. And kids could go in and buy .22 ammunition by the onesie twosies for a penny a piece.
Wow.
So we'd go in there, and they also had candy. So we'd go in there and buy a couple pieces of candy and buy, 8 or 10 .22 shells, and we were good to go. The neighbor out in Scotts Valley used to pay us 10 cents a squirrel tail for killing squirrels. So we, this was like our job. So we didn't waste .22 ammunition. That you could take that 1 penny shell and turn it into 10 pennies. So we did. In fact, one year, I saved squirrel tails from early spring when there was a lot of squirrels till late summer after the pear harvest, and I took them up to, the guy's name was Art Ora, and I had him in a sack, a little sack about that big. I dumped him out, and he counted them out. I had $28 worth of squirrel tails.
Wow.
He said, $28 was a lot of money back then. He handed it to me. He said, don't ever do that again. Okay.
What did you spend the money on?
You know, I guess all farm kids had that. They made jeans back then that were double kneed. They had, and by our standards, they were the ugliest jeans made by a human being. And we all wound up wearing them. That's what our mothers bought us. But what we really wanted were Levi's. And so, and Levi's were, you know, like crazy expensive, like today. So, when I think I went to Harsner's, which was a dry goods store, and bought myself Levi's to wear to school. And I remember they were like $6 a pair. You know, it just sounds ludicrous today, but yeah.
It was expensive.
Oh, it was expensive, and my dad thought I was crazy. You know, you've lost your mind. You know?
Do you, what did your father do for a living?
My father was a farmer. He, originally they lived in the Bay Area before he married my mom, and him and his brothers owned a lumber yard in El Cerrito. And when all the other boys got their naturalization papers, my dad was too busy, couldn't be bothered. Then about 1936 or 37 rolled around. Now naturalization papers are starting to get hard to get, especially for anybody connected to Germany. So they kept rolling along a little bit, and then him and his brothers owned this lumber yard, and the rest of them decided that he was jeopardizing them, that him not being a naturalized citizen could prompt the government to take the lumber yard. So they bought a ranch in Kelseyville on the advice of a fellow that lived in Kelseyville, and he said, move to Kelseyville. He said, they'll probably never find you there. He says, and it's full of people that will understand you, because there was a lot of Germans, there was a lot of Dutch, there was a lot of Belgians there. And so my dad moved up, and he was the manager of his brother's ranch. So he worked at that, and my granddad hated making violins, but he loved to work in the dirt. And that was my dad love. The moment he got up here and started working the ranch, he fell in love with it. And then in 1940, I guess 7, he hired extra help to harvest in the pears. One of the guys on the crew that had done some pruning and some other things and was going to help with the harvest said, well, I have a few relatives that I could help out. He says, I have a stepdaughter that could help too. Okay. So they came out, and that stepdaughter was my mother.
Oh.
And, you know, she was about, she claimed she was 5'2", but she was less than 5'2". She was about 5'1 3/4". That's not the proper build for picking pears, but she worked at it. But she had trouble, at that time they picked off of 16-foot ladders, and she had trouble moving that wooden ladder around. So my dad would help her move the ladder. And one thing led to another, and they started dating. And after the pear harvest, she also was was a part-time telephone operator in the exchange in Kelseyville. And she worked like the old board downstairs.
Oh, wow.
She worked at one of those boards.
Oh.
So they hit it off and decided they weren't going to have a fancy wedding, they're going to elope, and they did. And everybody said it wouldn't last, including my grandmother. And it did last a long time. My dad at the time was 40, and my mother was 23.
And how long were they married for?
Oh my goodness, how long were they married? Not quite 50 years.
Wow.
So, it was interesting. They, because they were from different generations and different backgrounds, some things they just couldn't understand. And I find the same thing is true of, my generation and the current generation. There's just some things I don't understand, but they had a good thing. The funny thing was, my mother always told me and my brothers that Dad loved her so much that he put that ranch in her name. And it's Mom, Of course you believe your mom. But in all actuality, he wasn't a naturalized citizen. He couldn't own that ranch.
Oh.
So finally, and it was, I think after all of my brothers were born, it was 1956, he went and got his naturalization and became a naturalized citizen. But yeah, could only happen in Lake County,
What other jobs did your mother have?
My mother worked at, she worked at Lakeside Hospital for a while. There was a rest home that is in the courthouse annex that's out by the sheriff's department. And she worked there for a while. And she worked, this almost became really embarrassing. She worked for the juvenile department that was working right down there in one of those little brick buildings.
Oh, below us?
Yes.
Here at the courthouse?
Yes.
Okay.
And I got in trouble. And it was a little embarrassing for Mom.
Oh no.
And I actually lost my driver's license for having loud exhausts on my car.
Oh.
Because they had no mufflers, they were just straight pipes. And as luck would have it, I figured I had it made because I knew the juvenile court judge because my mom worked for him. I thought, this is going to be a walk in the park. Well, the day that I went in there, the juvenile court judge was off, and the superior court judge was taking his place.
Oh.
And I walked in there and, I was 16, so, I was doing James Dean. And, and he looked at me, and of course I had to bring my dad. And he looked at me and he said, I have 16 complaints or 17 complaints against your car for loud mufflers. And I just kind of, shrugged it off. And he says, okay. He goes, 6 months suspended license. And I said, 6 months? And he hit it again. He goes, and a $25 fine. Do you have anything else to say, Mr. Klier? No. Yes. And then he turned around and he said, Mr. Klier, to my dad, he said, I know you're a hardworking man. He said, and you're probably losing money right now. He said, I don't want your money. He said, I want his money. He says, make him earn that $25. Oh, great. So yeah, it was the longest 6 months I ever had.
So did you work with him on the farm?
Yeah. Oh yes. He found there's never any shortage of jobs on a farm. And so yes, I worked pretty hard on the farm to work off that $25 was a lot of money. And the funny thing is, years later, I became a Boy Scout leader and got involved with the Boy Scout leaders in the county. And one of those leaders at the other end of the lake was a retired Superior Court judge that I knew very well.
Oh.
So we had a big meeting down there for something and came out, and I walked up to him and I said, you don't remember me, do you? He looked at me. No. And I recited the story, and he says, I remember you so well now. He says, I would have wiped that smirk off of your face. He says, if I'd have had to sentence you to 100 years in jail. Okay. So we became good friends.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Are you still friends with him?
No, I don't think he's still alive. That was a while ago. So I'm trying to think, I can't remember exactly when I quit scouting, but well, I know when was when I couldn't sleep on the ground anymore. But I don't think he's still with us, but it was interesting.
Did you have any hobbies as a child?
Gee, I was trying to think. Maybe later, I built model cars and did that kind of thing, and collected junk, from what my mom said. A lot of, we used to go out, the creek banks were full of old cars. They used the old car bodies to shim up the creek banks. So we would cruise the creek banks and pick up, decorative things and door handles and things from old cars. I wish I had some of those today. Some of them were pretty rare. But we were just allowed to, my mom and dad used to, send us out, before we started really working on the ranch. In the morning, if we wanted, we'd say, oh, we're going to go someplace, and okay, fine, be back by dark, I'm going to take the 22, okay, fine, take the 22. So I'm sure that never happens today. But we had a lot of fun. We did all kinds of exploring and found all kinds of things. And our neighbor, Art Ora, who lived behind us, He had built some lakes up above us. We used to go up there, go swimming, go fishing. Later on, we went duck hunting up there, and it was great. It was really great.
Did you go to college?
For a short time.
Where did you go?
What?
Where did you go?
College to Redwoods.
And what was your major?
Staying out of Vietnam.
Oh, okay, so you didn't go to Vietnam. Were you in the military at all?
No.
Okay.
I didn't. As eventually, I didn't pass the physical, but
Oh.
they tried really hard. I think I went for 5 or 6 physicals at Oakland.
Oh.
And before they finally decided, we're never going to get him, you know.
What was your first job?
I was trying to think. Probably working in the pear sheds. I worked there. Well, actually, I worked before that. I worked in the orchards, and I worked in the hops. Believe it or not, they grew hops in Scotts Valley, and all the guys wanted to, make a few bucks by moving irrigation pipe for somebody, which is relatively easy when you're working in an orchard. Hops, not so much. And so they all didn't want to do the hops, and so I was looking for one, and everybody had already pretty much found a place to go, and so I went to work for Ray Collins out in Scotts Valley, moving irrigation pipe in the hops. Unfortunately, hop vines, if they rub your skin, burn like fire. And so I found out pretty quickly why nobody wanted to do that. But it was close enough that I could, ride my bicycle down there and change the irrigation pipe and whatever. And then the next year, I worked for Ray again, and they used to cut those hops down, and then they'd pick the flowers off of them, and then you had this vine to get rid of, and they dumped it in an old Model A dump truck. And he said, I'm going to put you driving that dump truck down to the creek. He dumped it in the creek. So, okay, he says, just back it up there, he says, and tilt the bed and it'll dump it in the creek. Well, what he didn't tell me was that the Model A had mechanical brakes, which nobody had ever adjusted, and came very close to running the dump truck off in the creek. But that's another thing. They never had a second thought. We drove tractor for everybody. We didn't have a driver's license. We drove tractor for everybody. In fact, a lot of the kids used to drive the pear trucks to the pear shed from their orchard with no license. It was scary. And they had the biggest collection of old trucks you ever saw in your life. The hop growers did, and they hauled the hops to the hop dryer. And they always hired high school kids to drive those things. And most of them didn't have any doors. They took the doors off. And it is like Indy 500. Boy, those doggone old trucks, they'd go flying by. It was even out Scotts Valley. They hauled them from almost out to Blue Lakes in some cases. So, yeah, it was really interesting. And all the high school kids really, jockeyed for a chance to drive a hop truck. That had all gone by the wayside by the time I got into high school. But remember them going by our house and just flying, you know.
Have you always lived in Lake County, or have you lived other places?
After my wife and I got married, we moved to Mountain View for, I don't know, a few years, a couple of years. And really, now we're away from our family, and all the support and everything. Now you really have to do it yourself or not do it at all. And we did. And then finally we discovered that, oh yeah, you can make more money in the city, but it costs more money. So you don't gain anything. So we decided to move back, and we moved back and moved to Scotts Valley. And she was a PBX operator for Fairchild Corporation down there. And I worked a bunch of little part-time jobs. I worked in a motorcycle shop, and I worked in a speed shop, and I worked in a used furniture store, and you know, just kind of made it happen.
How long were you married for? Or are you still married?
I'm still married. I'm married for 52 years.
Wow. What's your wife's name?
Pam Klier.
Cool.
Yeah.
Do you have any children?
Yes, I have a son that lives in San Francisco. His name is Ian Klier. He works for Apple Corporation. And then actually, he bought the house we're living in. He, unfortunately, you know, sometimes plans aren't as good as what actually can happen. We were going to fix our old house up, which we had just pretty much paid off. But it would involve, you know, moving to one corner of the house and fixing the other corner, and then moving into that corner and fixing the other corner. And he's, you know, he's always been one of those people that can see the truth in things. And he said, Dad, he said, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So, was it 3 Christmases ago? He wanted to look at a house. We went and looked at a house and had no idea what he was thinking. And he bought it. He said, I'm supposed to buy, this is my banker said I need to buy something big. Okay, so he bought the house and he moved us into it. And so that's where we're living now.
Wow. Do you have any pets?
Oh yes. I've got a cat that originally when we moved into this house, the cat belonged to the neighbor. And in the mornings, this house has a nice porch, and we put a nice little picnic table out there. And I'd go out in the early mornings and have a cup of coffee and watch the day wake up, you know. And one day this cat came over and kind of rubbed me on the leg, and you know, so over the course of a month, now the cat comes over and is sitting on the table, and when I sit down, she gets in my lap and okay, pet the cat. Well, so this went on and went on and went on, and finally the young lady next door, she came over, she said, yeah, she says, I'm moving, and says, that cat really likes you. She said, what would you say if I said I was going to give you that cat? I said, it'd be fine. So that's where I got my cat.
What's your cat's name?
Well, that depends on who you talk to, because I found out that I'm not the only one that she visits all the time.
Oh.
She visits people all over the neighborhood. So I didn't know what her name was, and she has white feet, so they look like socks. So I called her Bobby Socks.
Oh.
Well, I found out that the young lady that owned her found her in Findlay, and she was like the only survivor of her litter. And she had all kinds of health problems and everything else, and she called her Findlay. So I said, oh, fine. So the lady across the street calls her Miss Kitty, and I'm trying to think what the people up the street call her. Miss Whiskers, because she's got big whiskers. Miss Whiskers. So she'll answer to anything.
So let's talk a little bit about the gun club.
Okay.
How did you get involved into it, and what role do you play?
Well, I shoot black powder guns, replicas. And I kind of got into that, and I wanted to organize a club of my own. So I talked to a gentleman that was a member of the Canocti Rod and Gun Club, and he, in fact, a charter member, and he told me, he said, starting a gun club is really hard. He says getting the property and getting all the permits and everything. He says it's hard. He says you'd be a lot better off to join the Canocti Rod and Gun Club, and then just organize a black powder section within it. So I said, okay. So I did, and him and I shot together. But that's an old club. It's been here since 1958. And
What year did you get involved?
Probably, I'm trying to think what year, maybe 73. And so many of the old boys that were in there then were charter members, started it. And they started it because they came back from World War II or Korea with surplus military rifles, which they cut down and reworked and put scopes on them and made target rifles out of them. Had no interest in black powder at all. And every time I tried to kind of ooze into that, they shot me down. So they, Glenn Wiles was the guy that I started shooting with originally. And Glenn said, maybe we should start a black powder club. I said, well, hell, I think it'd be easier just to outlive these guys. He laughed. He says, I don't know, they're pretty tough. I know. And eventually that's what happened. One by one, they passed away, and then the club got to a point where, because of the way it was set up, you could wind up getting into the presidency and then you couldn't get out. And if nobody else ran against you, you were it, you're stuck. That happened. And so they looked at me because I was one of the young guys in the club, and they said, well, how about you being I said, I'll tell you what, I will be the president, but I said, the board of directors are here. I said, you have a directors meeting and change the presidency length to 1 year, and I'll do it. And I did. And now I think I just finished, I think, my 5th stint as president.
What do you do as president? What are your job duties?
Well, the Canocti Rod and Gun Club shares a range with the Lake County Sheriff's Department. So you're in essence a liaison between the Sheriff's Department and the club. And, you kind of have to, keep your club in line. And we do a lot because the Sheriff's Department doesn't have a lot of funds for improvement out there. So the Canoctown Rod and Gun Club does a lot of the improvement and a lot of the finances to improve the range. And it's a rare situation, and there's a lot of safety concerns. And of course, there's a shotgun range next to us, and we have to kind of team with them as well. And it's within a park, so you kind of have to work around, what they're doing in the park, so they don't put themselves in a spot where it could be dangerous. Mm-hmm. But it's a beautiful club. It's a beautiful place to be. The improvements over the years has been amazing. So yeah, it's good. It's a good thing.
Do you have meetings?
Yes.
And how often do you meet, and where do you meet?
We meet once a month. We meet at the Kelseyville Lions Club, and we support a lot of things. We really believe in supporting Lake County, and we have our own scholarship program, and we always advertise hunter safety courses, which are run on the range, and just a lot of things. It's, I don't know.
How many members do you have?
A little over 800.
Wow.
Yeah, I really think that the Canoctown Rod and Gun Club is the biggest Lake County based nonprofit here.
Yeah.
And they're not all from Lake County, but a lot of them are. We've got members that live in the Bay Area. We've got members that live in Santa Rosa and like that. Places are so hard to get to shoot, and we try to keep our range so nice that quite often when we have shooting events and somebody comes from out of the area, if they really have no place to shoot, they'll join. Well, for one thing too, we don't raise our fees to the point where it's prohibitive. Almost anybody that can afford a gun can afford to come out and shoot. So yeah.
Do you have a gun collection?
My wife says I do, but it's just basically stuff. I have a hard time getting rid of anything, so almost all of the guns over time that I've acquired, I still have, and I did acquire a couple of guns that eventually will wind up here. I never started out to be a gun collector, but I wound up with a couple of antique muzzleloaders, and then I wound up with some other equipment kind of goes with them, and then recently I wound up with 2 slaughterback rifles that really belong here. Since Charlie Slaughterback's shop was like 50 yards that way.
Oh, who was he?
Oh, Charlie Slaughterbeck was a gun maker and gunsmith. Him and his two brothers. But he worked here alone, and he was a target shooter and made a lot of target rifles. And his span of building guns, he built from the late muzzleloading period into the early cartridge gun period. So it's nice to have somebody that spans that area. He was instrumental in, as scopes getting used on a gun. Before that, almost everything was some kind of a mechanical sight. But both of these guns one has the scope and one has the early remnants. It has no lenses in it, but it's a tube scope, and it's double barreled. It's a muzzleloader, double barreled. And it also is marked that it was made in Lakeport.
Oh.
Which was the most important thing to me.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a character, there's no doubt about it, and so were his brothers. And there were actually quite a few gunsmiths up here in the early days, but probably the most famous of the bunch was Charles Slaughterbeck.
So how long have you been a member of the Friends of the Lake County Museum?
Oh, geez.
Which is the nonprofit that oversees the courthouse.
Yeah. I think I'm still the president.
Oh.
Things got a little shaky in the last year. I would say probably about 10 years maybe.
Oh, okay.
I used to love to come up here and look at things, and if you come to a museum often enough, the curator will spot you, and then pretty soon it's like, what do you know about these? What do you, So, yeah, that was kind of where it went, and I got invited to join, and I did, and then they were electing some officers, and I got elected to a little office, and then all of a sudden I was the president.
What do you do as president?
Not much. Well, used to be, we had, fundraisers and things like that, but with the, COVID and all that, it's really hard. Also, and I find it true in a couple of organizations that people don't want to be a doggone officer in an organization, or they just want to be a grunt, because they don't want to donate the time, So I thought, well, what else would I do, By that time I was retired, I might as well. So slowly, the Friends of the Museum have waned down to the point that we're always looking for new members, desperately looking for new members now, because it's hard. It's hard to get a quorum. It's hard to do a lot of things. But we've done a lot of things in this museum we're pretty proud of. So
what kind of things have you done?
Well, these cases and things, found a lot of these guns. They're in old collections, and probably would have been, sold or thrown away. I don't know. But, told them, you could donate those things to a museum. That'd be really great. Then they're pretty much going to be for a long time, So it was fun. We had one of the founding members of the gun club was Bob Seiler, and when he passed, the family had an enormous like a yard sale out there, and invited us out there because they thought there was probably going to be some things in there that would be valuable for the museum. There was, and we bought some things, and there was a ton of guns, old guns in there, because Bob Seiler was a gun guy. He was quite the character, and they wound up donating I don't know how many guns to the museum. So, it's a lot of things. It's not what you know, it's who you know, especially in Lake County. So, yeah.
What part did you play in the remodeling and the seismic retrofit of the courthouse?
I was working for Duncan Pumps, and one day the boss came in. He goes, "I've got a job for a couple of you." Okay. He chose me and his son-in-law, and he sent us with a couple of little GI entrenchment shovels and bucket and a rope down here where they were redoing the old courthouse museum. Now at that time, the whole interior of this building was stripped. There was nothing in here. It was just barrel, and they had it all caged in steel rebar. Well, what's this? He says, it's going to be a museum, and they're going to need an elevator. Really? How does a shovel and a bucket, how's that going to help an elevator? He says, he says, this elevator's only got to go one floor or so, and he says, it's going to be like an old hydraulic lift in a gas station. And he said, they need somebody to dig the hole 18 feet down under the courthouse to put that ram. Oh, middle of summer. So we went out there and we started digging. We don't know, We had gone down quite a ways, probably 8 or 10 feet. And the guys that were going to shoot, the inside of these walls were shot in a product like gunite, like they shoot on pools. And he goes, what are you guys doing? So we're digging a hole for the ram for the elevator. He says, how far down are you? I said, probably about 10 feet. He said, you do realize that if that hole caves in and it catches you from here down, you die. He says, that's incredibly dangerous. Who knew? So they had some plywood. They built some plywood like squares that they fit down in a hole, and we would dig down and then put another square on top and dig down. He says, it probably won't save you, but it might. So we dug down, I was trying to think how many feet we were supposed to dig. 18 feet we were supposed to dig. And I think we dug to a little over 16. And we hit lake water.
Oh.
Yeah. I luckily was on top by then, and my partner was down at the bottom, and he started yelling to get me out of here, get me out of here, get me out of here. He said, I hit water. What are you talking about? He got in the bucket, and I pulled him up. And sure enough, it filled up in the bottom about that much in water, and it was lake water. So we couldn't go any farther, so I figured, well, what are they going to do, you know? Well, somehow they worked around it, and the elevator's in, and it's still working. So it is slow. I understand that now.
Yeah. What major historical events have occurred in your lifetime?
Oh, geez. Landing on the moon, and, you know.
Do you remember where you were when that happened? When it was on TV?
No, I don't. I remember I was in the 6th grade when John F. Kennedy was shot.
Oh.
I remember that.
Uh-huh.
We didn't think it was possible. We were totally like, what? Didn't anybody tell them they can't shoot a president? You know? Those are two of the probably the most major events that I could think of, but it was really interesting, you know, growing up in the same town. People don't think that about the history, you know, of some of these old buildings and stuff. And when they started refurbishing the old building on Main Street, for a while I worked for a Sears catalog store, which was I could see it from here, on 3rd and Main. And that building is an old building. And at that time, it still had the steel fire doors in the back, so that if something caught fire, you could close it up and it wouldn't leak out. And it went through the '06 quake.
Oh.
And there was actually some, and I think it's all Lake County brick too, which are...
The 1906 earthquake?
Yes. And there used to be an Oddfellows Lodge upstairs, which the boss was an Oddfellow. And I was working on the back, and the lodge members said that they had something leak out of the ceiling. They didn't know what it was. And they said it was landing on their podium and it was making it sticky. So my boss was the youngest of the Oddfellows, so he wound up with the job, which means I wound up with the job. So we went upstairs and we looked, and so I got up in the crawl space up there, and I came out and I said, there is an incredibly big beehive in here.
Uh-oh.
So he said, how are they getting in? I said, I don't know. So we went in the back, and in the back, up on the 2nd floor, you could see a crack in the wall. Good old Lake County brick, they're like made of cheese. And every once in a while a bee would fly in. I said, they're flying into that crack. So finally we had to go in there and poison the hive, and then we had to, once again, you could scare me to death with a doggone trenching shovel, and to go into the attic and dig honeycomb out with entrenching shovels.
Wow.
Oh man, it was a mess. But then they sealed up the back of the building. But it was pretty interesting. That's an old building. I had to go under it too, because before anybody ever thought there would be homeless people, you know, living in the park, there were homeless people living in the park. And the underside of that building was open.
Oh.
So they were living under there. And one night somebody went by, and there's old gratings, cast iron gratings down there along the sidewalk on 3rd Street. And somebody saw light coming out of there. Looked down, they had a fire going under there. So I had to go in there and clean that out and close it up too. It was pretty exciting.
What local events have impacted your life? Did you go through the fires at all?
No, we were evacuated from the fires.
Which fire?
Gee, I can't remember there were so many of them now. But when they started evacuating North Lakeport, we were going to stay, but because we weren't in a spot where we were likely to get burnt, so I thought I'll just stay here, you know. Well, and of course power went out and the water was iffy, and finally we decided, well, we'll just evacuate. That's the easiest way, you know. So we did. We evacuated to my brother-in-law's house on Cobb Mountain, and then a fire broke out there and chased us out of there, and we wound up staying at the high school in Middletown. And my brother-in-law has a herd of goats, so he couldn't leave his goats, so all of us took our pickup trucks, and each of us, you know, can't haul all those goats together because they don't get along. So we went to Middletown with this big load of goats, and luckily Middletown High School has an excellent FFA program, and we were kind of panicky that they weren't going to be able to take them, and there was a little gal there, and she said, no problem at all. So you just bring them in here, put them in that pen, and put some in that pen, and I got some over there, and they took care of it. It was great. But
did you know anybody that lost their house because of the fire?
I was trying to think. I probably do, but I can't think right offhand.
What do you think some of the biggest problems that face our nation are, and how can they be solved?
Gee, where do I start? Well, I think one of the biggest problems we have is that in this day and age, we always panic first. Always look at the worst side of it. No matter what happens, you know, we're all going to die. You know, that's the end game. And for heaven's sakes, you can't live like that. You know, you just can't. I think one of the biggest problems we have is gun control. People are terrified of guns. No gun ever killed anybody by itself. I said, I have had people, as the president of the gun club, I've had people get a hold of me and say, come over and take this gun away. Why? Oh, I'm scared to death of it. I says, keep your finger off the trigger, for heaven's sakes. Yeah, it's the unnatural fear. Probably the best thing I can say about living my life, my early life in this county, is that we did all kinds of things that would scare people to death today. You know? Yeah, things have changed a little bit, but you don't have to panic first. You know? Sit down and think. To be honest, quite recently for me, I had a stroke. And when it happened, I couldn't figure out what it was at first, and then I said, this is a stroke. And I immediately started forming a way to get help. That's what people need to do, you know? I could have just sit there and freaked out and, you know, wasted a lot of time, but I didn't. The minute something happens, I try to think out of it, and that's what we need to do.
What are your thoughts on COVID?
I don't know. It's, you know, I feel that it's almost impossible for it to be a naturally occurring disease. You know, it's made too many twists and turns. I mean, they've had all kinds of doggone epidemics before that eventually they stop it. This one, they don't seem to have a break anywhere. No matter, they just about get it, you know, taken care of, and it turned into something else. I don't think that's natural. I really don't. You know.
What were some of your greatest accomplishments?
Not many. Probably my years as a Boy Scout. I got to guide so many young men that really were amazing people, and took them from kids that were just kids, you know, really hard to guide. But in the long run, and many of them are my friends today, you know, and they're just amazing people, and they've done amazing things, you know. I think that's another area where panic first is ruining Boy Scouts. But that was good. Oh, that and raising my son. I had a wonderful time raising my son.
How old is your son now?
He is 39, I think, 39.
And he works at Apple?
Yeah. He's been there a little over 10 years. And he's amazing.
Do you get to see him often?
Pretty often. When he gets time off, he quite often comes up to Lake County, because I think he likes Lake County pretty well too, so that's good. And of course he's keeping track of his mother and I, because we're not kids anymore.
What's the best advice that you've ever received?
Oh boy. Best advice. I don't know. That's tough.
And what would you describe as the best day of your life?
The day my son was born.
Aw.
Yeah. I got to be there, and that was great. And interesting thing is, I was the president of the gun club, and we had what they call a rendezvous here. It was a black powder event. We invite other clubs and other individuals around. And it happened on Mother's Day weekend. And My wife went into labor the day before. And in fact, actually, I'd taken her to Ukiah for an ultrasound or something. And while they were doing it, her water broke. So they took her across the street to the hospital. And so now I'm the king bee, and I can't figure out, I want to be here, but I got to be there, and this is crazy. Well, I called them up and told them, I said, somebody's going to have to take this over from the gun club perspective, because I'm going to be a dad. I'm going to be here. And at the time, the doctors don't know it all either. They swore that my son was going to be a little girl. So we were in the doggone hospital over there, and he popped out, and I'm like, uh-oh, that's not going to work as a little girl. It was very good. It was absolutely the greatest day of my life, I think.
And what did you name him?
Ian Jacob Klier. My uncle, which is a whole interesting situation in itself. You have to kind of go back to my grandfather, whose name was Joseph Ignaz Klier. Well, in Germany and Austria, every Klier, I think, that was named Joseph was a violin maker. So when he moved to the United States and wound up in a community that was pretty much made up of immigrants, they'd ask him who he was, and he'd say, Joseph Klier. And they would always say, oh, the violin maker. Because in Europe, Joseph Kliers were violin makers. He didn't want to be a violin maker. So he had his name changed to Ignaz Joseph Klier. Just turned the two names around. And he named my uncle Ignaz. And he didn't want to be Ignaz, so he changed his name to Jacob. His name was Ignaz Jacob Klier, so he changed his name to Jacob. And so my son's middle name is Jacob, because that was the name that my Uncle Jake wanted. So that was kind of interesting, It's funny that the whole European way of thinking, that your name could designate what you do, and that was one of the freedoms that my grandfather just relished. He wanted to work in the dirt. He wanted to grow things, and he did. And my dad was the same way. My dad was just intrigued by what he could grow and how he could make things better, It was fascinating.
So is there anything I haven't asked you that you think is important for others to know about yourself?
Not really.
Is there anything else you want to share?
Not right offhand. I think my battery ran down. Finally.
Well, thank you for taking the time to sit with us today and for sharing your story.